Italy has like 4 main NATO bases hosted in the territory, and over 120 US military bases in Italy, with over 15,000 US soldiers based in Italy. And also there is like the fourth fleet, US fleet, like in the Mediterranean Sea. So there is like, I mean, I don't know if I do exaggerate, but I would say that Italy is occupied by the US military forces. So it's like really an occupation. And the military bases are used during this time also in the war in Ukraine. Like drones are flying from the military base of Sigonella in Sicily, and so on and so on. So Italy is totally integrated in the war now because of the role, the position in the Mediterranean Sea, but also because the US and NATO is dominating Italy militarily and politically.
Hello everyone, I'm Rania Khalek and this is Dispatches. Is it springtime for fascists in Italy? The victory of Giorgia Meloni in the country's recent elections followed the victory of a party in Sweden, similarly inspired by World War II-era fascists. Mussolini's followers have been in and out of power since Berlusconi's rise in the 90s, culminating in the rise and rapid fall of Salvini's Lega Party, and now the victory of the right-wing Brothers of Italy, named for the opening words of the national anthem. So how worried should we be? Are these fascists? Or just right-wing populists? They did come to power through democratic elections, after all, and they can't actually impose a dictatorship when European Union members are ruled by the dictatorship out of Brussels and have little sovereignty. Will this new government fail as quickly as its predecessors, as is the Italian tradition? How has the war in Ukraine impacted Italian politics? And where is the Italian left in all of this? Here to help us understand is Maurizio Coppola, a member of the international office of the Italian political party, Power to the People. But before we jump into it, be sure to hit the subscribe button and the bell so you get a notification whenever we post new content. And if you appreciate this show, you can help it grow by becoming a patron at patreon.com/breakthroughnews or by donating below on YouTube. Maurizio, welcome to the show.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Well, thank you so much for coming on to help explain to us what's going on in Italy. Obviously, you have the election of this woman, Giorgia Meloni. And before I ask you my first question, I actually just very quickly want to play this short clip of her. This is, of course, on Breakthrough News. We posted this on Breakthrough News. But I think this clip, a lot of people saw it. It was her basically talking about Mussolini, and so I just think that's important to play real quick so people see who we're talking about. So this is something that she said in 1996.
Que Mussolini, c'était un bon politicien. C'est-à-dire que tout ce qu'il a fait pour l'Italie. Et on ne le trouve pas ça dans les politiciens qu'on a eu dans les dernières 50 ans.
So, this is important because this is her, right? Not that long ago, 20 years ago, a little more than 20 years ago, praising Mussolini, who was a fascist. So that said, can you, Maurizio, walk us through who is this woman, Giorgia Meloni, and how did she win? What does she stand for? What does she believe in? Is she a fascist?
It's a very good question to start with, because I think that the response will show a little bit also the contradictions between how she presents herself today and what she is really. So I think it is not very evident to say if she's a fascist or not, but I think we will go through that question that will accompany us the whole conversation. So, Giorgia Meloni, she was a very young activist in the peripheries of Rome. She entered very quickly the far right when she was very young, like 16, 17. And she was very strong in these youth organizations, and so she very rapidly also went into the bigger parties and were there with the bigger militants of the party. So she entered already in 2006 the Italian Parliament when she was only 29 with Alleanza Nazionale. Alleanza Nazionale, it's like the National Alliance. It's the party that followed the MSI, Movimento Sociale Italiano, the post-fascist party, which was created and established in 1946. So Alleanza Nazionale is the continuity of this post-fascism in Italy. So she entered the parliament in 2006 with this party. She was in 2008 till 2011 in the fourth Berlusconi government. She was the Minister of Youth. And in 2012, she found Fratelli d'Italia. Why she did that? Why she exited Alleanza Nazionale? Why she quit Alleanza Nazionale? Because Fratelli d'Italia, Brothers of Italy, was found because Alleanza Nazionale decided to support the technocratic government of Mario Monti. In this time, in 2012, there was like this sovereign debt crisis in Southern Europe. Italy was also very strongly touched by this debt crisis. So the president decided to implement a technocratic government, and they said, no, we do not need technocrats in the government. We need a political government. So she exited. She went out of the party and founded Brothers of Italy. It is very ironically, I think, that the party that is called Brothers of Italy is led by a woman, and it's like the only woman with this position in the bigger parties in Italy, and as if there are no women in the party. So this is like the contradiction. So like in the elections of 2013, she entered again at the parliament. So she has a continuity in the Italian institutions since 2006. And in 2020, she also became the president of the European Conservatives and Reformists Party. So like the coalition in Europe of these conservatives and ultra-conservatives. So what to say? I mean, during the electoral campaign, she presented herself constantly as the new, as the party and the leader that is against the old political elite. She has a very strong national conservatism. She stands for sovereignty. Her slogan is like God, homeland, and family. So a very fascist, historically fascist slogan. She copied also the slogan of the US, of Trump, like Italy first. So the fraction of small and medium-sized enterprises, which produces above all in the northern part of Italy, they support the Brothers of Italy and Giorgia Meloni. But she's also saying Italians first. So it's not only Italy first, but it's also Italian first. So she's also talking to all these territories where the people feel abandoned by the political institutions. So I think this is like, and she was able to capture this frustration of the working people, above all, exactly as I said, in the peripheries of the urban centers. She has like a program with economic and commercial protectionism and so on and so on. So you can say, yes, she comes from a tradition of post-fascism, that is clear, but she has also she renewed herself. She was in the political elite since 2006, so she's not very the new that we can imagine with fascism that was also 100 years ago. I remember that in Italy, this practically exactly 100 years ago, that there was the March on Rome by Mussolini when he took over the power in Italy, when the king accepted that the working class movement and the socialist movement was destroyed by the fascists. So we can say, and maybe as a first conclusion, that Giorgia Meloni is a strong leader which is occupying a power vacuum because of a hegemonic crisis of the ruling classes. So she's this kind of leader that is now occupying this position. So Giorgia Meloni is also the expression of exacerbating social contradictions.
That's a really good way to put it. And, it's interesting that you're being very nuanced about the idea, is she a fascist or not? Obviously, she was inspired by fascists, which you mentioned, but at the same time, Italy, like most European countries, she might be pro-sovereignty, but Italy kind of lacks sovereignty in a way, does it not? Because it's part of this broader EU program. So you can't actually change the nature of the government, right? You're bound by the rules of the EU first and foremost. And at the same time, she did come to power through a sort of democratic process, through elections. And you can correct me if I'm wrong, but there doesn't appear to be any sort of mass fascist movement behind her, right? So in a way, there is a bit of exaggeration when it comes to the sphere of fascism, though it's totally legitimate because given the crisis we're in the world. Obviously, she's a racist. She'll be bad for immigrants, bad for women, bad for the working class. But in the end, it seems as though this horrible dystopian system that we have is going to remain, in a way, this sort of like liberal democracy of, or this dictatorship of neoliberalism. Maybe I should put it that way, rather than dictatorship. Like, can it even go in the direction of dictatorship and fascism at this point? Or does the EU sort of, as an institution, act against that and force its version of whatever it is over anything else that Europe wants?
That's a very, very important question, I think, and it's not so easy to respond in a clear way. I think there are huge contradictions also inside of the European Union, of course. So the first thing that we should say, as like, is there a mass movement behind Giorgia Meloni and Brothers of Italy? I think, I mean, in 1994 and in 2008, when Silvio Berlusconi was elected the first time and the fourth time, indeed, after the elections, in the night of the elections, fascist and neo-fascist, post-fascist groups took to the streets to demonstrate, and finally they said, yes, we have like the space, the political and social space again to like act in the streets. This didn't happen this time in 2022. So it is true that, I mean, Giorgia Meloni grew a lot in terms of consensus, of electoral consensus, but it is also true that there is not like this base, because after 2018, after the elections of 2018, these groups, the neo-fascist groups that positioned themselves much more on the extra-parliamentary level, they were integrated by the strength of the right and far right in the Italian institutions. So the League collected a lot of them, but also Fratelli d'Italia, Brothers of Italy, they collected a lot of this extra-parliamentary right. And so this is like an important thing. There were no like these black shirts taking to the streets in the night of September 25 after the elections, starting to beat migrants and so on and so on. This is something that didn't happen. So there is not like this territorial radicality of the organization. But at the same time, we can see that there is, in a way, a link between the neo-fascist little groups that, for example, in the periphery of Rome, where Giorgia Meloni is also very strong, they organized like a right-wing tenants movement, asking for public housing only for Italians. They should not be distributed to the immigrants, and so on and so on. And there you have, like, on the level of the municipalities, right-wing politicians of Brothers of Italy, they work together, give information to these movements, to these tenant movements, Italian tenants movements, like this national sovereign tenant movement. So there is like still a link, but it is very on a lower level of the institutions. What is not sure and clear how it will affect also the national level politics. Then the question of the EU. I think the question of the EU is very important, because there is a deep contradiction inside of the EU. The promises of the EU integration was not completed. I mean, if you see from the sovereign debt crisis, the example of Greece, then the crisis of the pandemic, like the incapacity and also the unwillingness of the ruling classes to coordinate common measures to give a response to the pandemic and to the social and health consequences of the pandemic. But then also like the missing common solutions now in those days for collective problems like the energy crisis. I mean, Germany decided to spend 200 billions for supporting families and companies, and Italy is giving 10 billions, and they're saying we have a problem. We need like an European solution, because there are still inequalities in Europe, and so the European Union, yes, it's not that integration promise that was presented like 25 years ago. I have like to make like a little statement also on Greece, because I think it's very important to see the example of Greece, and then we come back to Giorgia Meloni, to Italy. But in Greece, I mean, after 12 years of monitoring by the Troika of Greece, August 1st to 2022, the Troika abandoned Greece again, because they said, okay, they are paying the last debts, so we can leave the country. What is the situation in Greece today? We have like the GDP crashed of around 40%. Unemployment rate is increasing, precarity is increasing. 500,000 young people left Greece in the last 10 years. So there is no European integration. There is no elimination of social inequalities. So the EU is not an orientation point for the working classes today. But what does it mean for national politics? And I think this is also like a contradiction in which Giorgia Meloni and the new far-right government has to move. There are possibilities, even if there is the Maastricht treaty, even if there are treaties on European level, the national politicians, they can also say, no, we do not accept them. We do like finance working class, we do support working class, we do support public services, and so on and so on. But it is, of course, a question of will, question of interests, and the far right has not an interest to go against the elite of the EU. And so there will be like also the far right in Italy will not be the party giving responses to the working class against the elites of the EU.
Right. And then I'm curious, before we kind of move on to some bigger picture questions, what are your expectations for Meloni's ability to even have a government that survives more than a few months?
Yeah, that's also like not only depending on her will, I think, but it is an important point. So there are like 2-3 measures she presented, and she said she will push forward to them. It's like 2 constitutional reforms. The first one is like to move from a parliamentary system to a presidential system. So that means that the power will be much more close to one person, like in France. It's like the way France has the political system, in which like Macron has the power very concentrated on one person. She wants to move in this direction, so that, and this is like also a way to reinforce the repressive and the authoritarian character of her political idea. And the second one, and this is linked also to the possibility to govern for a longer time, it's like the introduction of regionalism, like the differentiated autonomy. That means that the regions have some autonomy in financially, economically, but also on the development of social services and so on. And this is above all the demands from the Italian north, in which also like fractions of capital, the important fractions of capital is moving and working, and they ask for regionalism to like separate also from like what they call the parasitic south. So they want to strengthen the capital in the north. Salvini, when he was in government in 2018-19, he was not able to introduce and to push forward these reforms. And now they are all expecting that Giorgia Meloni can do that. Then there is like, okay, this is like one of the elements. Is she able to push forward this politics for the capital? Yes or no? I mean, there is also a big question mark. I would say it's not so clear if she can really find a majority in the parliament on that. The second thing, it's also like how the EU, the European Union, will find like a way, measures to redistribute money, so that she, in a situation, in economically very hard situation in Italy, she can have money from the EU to distribute and to like also calm down the families and the working class, because this is also an important thing. A third element is also how like the coalition of the League, Brothers of Italy, and Forza Italia of Berlusconi, they can find an agreement now, because in the next 2 weeks they have to form this new government. I remember till now it is still Mario Draghi, the prime minister, and they are working on forming like this new government. And it is a question, because they already have like some conflicts on ministries, on who should take the presidency of the 2 chambers of the parliament. So it is not like the unity, it's not so clear inside also of the right. And the last thing, I mean, this is from our point of view also of the working class and of leftist movement, how the working class will respond on the current crisis. The current crisis is deep. I mean, we have an inflation rate of 8%, energy prices are increasing a lot. How will the working class react if the new government will not be able to give a response to the working class?
And do you foresee Meloni's Italy being like the Visegrad bloc? I'm sorry if I mispronounced that, but I'm talking here about like the Czech Republic, Hungary, Poland, Slovakia, these Central European countries, in the sense that, you know, they claim to be populist, but actually they're just promoting US interests in the EU while adopting right-wing cultural positions when it comes to, family values and like LGBT issues and all these sorts of things. So in a sense, do you see this being more of a pro-Western nationalism, like something you might see in, for example, Ukraine, while also wanting to be part of European nationalism?
Yeah, I think also there. I mean, it's a complicated dynamics and complicated mechanism that brings together these two positions. I think she's like a mediation point maybe between the Visegrad bloc and the Western nationalism. Why? Because I mean, she already like before the elections. I mean, she even got she visited Florida. She got like she got the okay from Hillary Clinton in the sense
Right.
we are for the
It's
US, we
crazy.
are for NATO, and so on and so on. So her position was very clear since the beginning. She will not make a break with you. She will not make a break with NATO and the US. She will give a continuity in the agenda of Mario Draghi, because Mario Draghi was implemented in 2021. Because of that, we need a continuity also with the Western politics, with the US politics. So she never said she will like destroy this alliance or like go against this alliance. On the other side, she's also like defending the conservatives and ultra conservatives from the Eastern Bloc, but not only. And this is something that maybe it's like specific. She's also speaking a lot with Vox in Spain. She's of course speaking a lot with the Law and Justice Party in Poland, with Fidesz in Hungary, with the Civic Democratic Party in the Czech Republic. So she's looking for an alliance of the conservative forces in Europe that goes over only like the Visegrad bloc. And this is, I think, also like the very sensitive moment, or how dangerous it could become. Yesterday, she spoke about we are like the beginning. In next year, it will be Vox in Spain. So there is like this reinforcement of a form of nationalism and conservatism. But I think also that on the very specific topics like the energy crisis, I mean, we know that the Eastern countries are much more dependent on the gas from Russia, and they always said inside of the European institutions that they do not want the sanctions, that they do not want to block the supply from gas from Russia, because they are much more dependent, and there is not possibility to like take other options like Italy is doing with Algeria or with Qatar or with Israel. I mean, this is not possible in Eastern Europe. So she's trying to find the mechanism of solidarity also inside of the European Union with this bloc, without speaking about the question of democracy and so on, of course.
And I'm curious if you could maybe explain how some of the more extreme right-wing parties did in this election.
Well, they were not really more extreme right parties, in the sense they were really. It was like it is pretty impossible to be even more right wing. But
It's always, unfortunately, it seems to me, every time I think that, someone comes along and proves me
there is
wrong.
no end at the right. There is also always
Yeah.
like yeah. No, you're right. But I mean, it is a little bit what I tried to explain before. Like in 2018, there were like these forces like Forza Nuova, Casa Pound, these much more extra parliamentary far right forces, which also participated in the elections, but always with a very little result. And of course, they were like much more these black shirts. Also, like 1 year ago, I remember it was October 8, 2021. Forza Nuova with his leader Fiore, they went in the house of the CGL of the union, destroying the house of the unions. And there was a demonstration also last weekend commemorating this fascist attack on the unions. I mean, they still exist in a way, but they are really they're in the minority. They have a lot of people integrated themselves in these stronger parties like the League and the Brothers of Italy. So there is. It lacks a strong post-fascist or neo-fascist groups, extra-parliamentary groups that, in a way, build on a social basis, build on the level of the territories with the working classes. The example I explained before was above all like the tenants movement. This is something that was very impressive, but it is very also isolated geographically. It is like in the periphery of Rome. It is not something you find in Naples or in Palermo or in another city. It is very specific on Rome.
And then there was reports about a low turnout of the working class in this election. So what explains that?
Yeah, I mean, the numbers are also very important. We didn't speak about the numbers yet, but I think the numbers are important. First of all, yes, I mean, over 36% of the entitled to vote didn't vote. So, like, it was like one of the lowest participation rate since the existing of the Italian Republic after World War II. So it is like something that was very impressive. This shows for me different things. First of all, a huge disappointment from the last government that was not able to respond to the different crises we were living, starting from the COVID crisis, the pandemic, but also now with the war and the energy crisis. No government was giving a response. The workers in the last elections, they voted above all for the five-star movement, the five-star movement that reached over 34% in 2018. And in these elections, they fell down to 15%. So it is like almost 20% of lost. 6 million voters, they lost 6 million voters. That is something huge, incredible to describe. And this is why, because the five-star movement presented itself as like against the elite, like this post-ideology of neither right nor left. We are like for the people, and they made one positive thing, I would say, this like the introduction of a social assistance for the poor people, what we call in here reddito di cittadinanza. So that's the first time in the history of Italy that they introduced like this social assistance for poor people and jobless people. But what does it mean? I mean, they only made this. And then they made the government with the League, then they made the government with the Democratic Party, so once with the far right, once with the center left. So they totally destroyed their not existing identity, we could say. So there was like a huge disappointment of the working class. But there is also another thing with the numbers I want to explain. Like we say the far right won in Italy. It's true. The center right government, the center right coalition reached 44%. The Brothers of Italy reached 28%, and they were like at 4% in the last elections 5 years ago. So there was a huge increasing, but the totality of the absolute voters in the center-left coalition, they remained the same as 4 or 8 years ago. So we speak always around 12 million people voting for the center-left coalition. So there was only like a redistribution inside of the coalition and not like votes from outside or like increasing in the absolute terms. But I mean, the low turnout we have to interpret it like in a double way. First of all, it is, I think, a project of the elites in Europe and in Italy to keep a huge distance between the people and the political institutions. They empty like the democratic content of the institutions. They produce like a huge gap between civil society and the political institutions, and in this way they can govern as they want. I mean, this is the thing. The people say we do not care. It's not our business. They are, in any case, if left or right, center left or center right, they are doing what they want. Like this huge gap, it's of course, I mean, it's really demobilizing the people. So this is one point. And the second point is that we have since 25, 30 years, a really conservative cultural hegemony that stabilized in the last 2 decades. And this is something that we have to take in consideration also when we speak about an alternative. So abstentionism, like having like a distance between people and the institution, it's a political program of the elites, but it is also like the result of a conservative cultural hegemony in our country.
Yeah, there certainly is this like feeling of disconnect, I think, by a lot of people, and an increasing belief. And I think this is true in a lot of countries of like, it doesn't really matter if I vote because nothing I do makes a difference. It's like a system I have actually no control over. I have a couple more questions about the right wing, but I want to come back to that because I want to ask you a bit about the left. You know, Italy once had the largest communist party in the Western Hemisphere, which isn't something that we're taught in schools in the United States. So can you explain to our viewers and listeners what happened to the Italian left? And here I'm talking about the history of US and UK sabotage, like actual covert and in some cases overt sabotage of the Italian communists. And then from there, can you maybe walk us through where the left in Italy stands today as a consequence of the past?
We need the show only for that. I think
I
that
know,
would be
that really does need its own
a
program. But
five-hour conversation. But it's now, I think it's very important what you are asking. It's really very important because I mean, Italy had one of the strongest communist party in Europe, as you said, and Italy was a little bit like a border between the capitalist West and the socialism in Eastern Europe. Not only geographically, but really also politically, because we know after World War II, the left, the Communist Party, was very strong. They occupied also a lot of seats in the parliament. They reached, even in the 70s, 35%. They never governed. The rhetoric in Italy is like the left, the communists governed Italy after World War II. That never happened. Italy, on a national level, never knew a communist government. It was always dominated by the Christian Democrats. But we had a very strong communist party in the parliament, so we had a strong institutional opposition of the communists, and above all, also we had a really huge cultural and political opposition outside of the parliament. So the social movements also recognized and defined themselves as communists. What does that mean? That we have a huge culture, communist culture, historically in Italy, and these movements and these parties, they build also like social institutions in which the working class organized itself. We are speaking about like strong labor unions. We are speaking about people's houses. We are speaking about workers' clubs where people met just to be together and to have a life as a working class, as workers. And this is, of course, strengthening also like the identity as a working class. And I would say that the US intervened in that very quickly. Already in the 50s, they financed like reactionary forces and obscure forces in Italy, like the Operation Gladio. It's like the term and the category we could speak about. Like the US always feared that Italy can go to the socialist East, to the socialist camp, and in this way also like being the starting point for the takeover of all over Europe of socialists. So they really fought a lot against the communists and against social movements in Italy. After the collapse of the Soviet Union and the fall of the Berlin Wall, communism disappeared very quickly in Italy. And this is something really impressive. Like we were the country, there was a huge transformation. We were the country with the strongest communist movement, the Communist Party in Europe, but at the same time, we were transformed in the country with the strongest anti-communism in the 90s and the 2000s. So this is like something very impressive. And why happened that? I mean, Italy also knew important neoliberal reforms. So like neoliberalism was also implemented in Italy, attacks on labor rights, attacks on social welfare state, and so on and so on. But I think there is also like, and our analysis should focus on what the left did. And I think there are like two tendencies in the post-communist left in Italy. The first is represented by the Democratic Party today. We remember that the Democratic Party is like a continuation of the Communist Party of Italy. Like the people today in the Democratic Party, they were in the 80s in the Communist Party of Italy. There is like, this is discontinuity. And the Democratic Party abandoned every single tradition of communism and integrated itself completely in the institutions of the bourgeois democracy. So they become also an enemy of the working class. In fact, the worst reforms against the workers were done under center-left governments, like labor market reforms and so on and so on. But there is also like a second tendency we have to analyze. And this is like the parties which still recognize themselves in the communist tradition or recognize themselves in the communist tradition in the 90s. They moved away from the working class based by simply choosing like the electoral way. They said, how can we strengthen communism in Italy? By making coalitions on an electoral basis be elected in the parliament, then maybe be also like this left support of central left governments, but at least we can bring like the opposition, we can bring oppositional positions inside of the parliament, and then like this being like a crutch of the Democratic Party, and this failed. I mean, this option failed. We have to say this means that since 2008 we do not have any communist representatives anymore in the parliament, and we do not have any communist MPs anymore, and so there is no socialist or communist left in the parliament. So what to do? This is the big question mark. And Potere al Popolo, Power to the People, my organization, was built and was launched exactly because of that, because we recognize like this failure of the left, and we say we have to go back to the working class, and for that we need to have our program, but also like our autonomy outside of the center left, because we cannot build a working class politics inside of a coalition or of a camp that is totally aligned with the bourgeois democracy.
Yeah, I think this is a problem that the left in so many countries is having right now at this particular moment. I really do. It's a really good point. I should go back and have like a whole episode devoted just to Operation Gladio itself. And no, it's wild. I mean, the US aligned itself with basically fascists across Europe to destroy the left, and like they committed terrorist attacks and like murdered people. But this is a story for another day. But we are seeing, I mean, some of what's the weakness of the left today is certainly a consequence of covert operations like that. But I want to ask you about the impact of the war in Ukraine. Because obviously, you know, Germany, we've heard a lot about Germany being impacted and German industry being impacted, but the same could happen to Italian industry. You're talking about this energy crisis, and obviously the energy crisis across Europe is going to affect politics. So first, let me start here, because obviously public opinion isn't always the same as what politicians are saying. So what is the Italian public opinion on the issue of the war in Ukraine, on the issue of NATO, on the issue of Russia, on the issue of the EU? And then after we talk about that, we can talk more about what the people in power think.
Yeah, so this is also a very interesting question, because we have to make a difference between before February 24 and after February 24. Italy has like 4 main NATO bases hosted in the territory, and over 120 US military bases in Italy, with over 15,000 US soldiers based in Italy. And also there is like the fourth fleet, US fleet, like in the Mediterranean Sea. So there is like, I mean, I don't know if I do exaggerate, but I would say that Italy is occupied by the US military forces. So it's like really an occupation, and the military bases are used during this time also in the war in Ukraine. Like drones are flying from the military base of Sigonella in Sicily, and so on and so on. So Italy is totally integrated in the war now because of the role, the position in the Mediterranean Sea, but also because the US and NATO is dominating Italy militarily and politically. So the public opinion, I mean, with this situation before the war, it was like, why do we use and spend all this money for these military bases? We do not need them. I mean, the war in Iraq, the war in Afghanistan, the failure of the US politics all over the world was really like, okay, the people, they are convinced we do not need the wars. We do not need militarization. I mean, Italy, for example, also in 2 referendums, they decided not to have nuclear power in Italy. And that means also not to have nuclear weapons. But there are nuclear weapons from the US in the Italian territories, in the military bases. So there was like also a movement, an anti-war movement, very strong. I remember that in 2003, the war against Iraq, there were like over 1 million people in Rome in a national demonstration, a very strong anti-militaristic, anti-war feeling and politics in Italy. This changed a little bit in the last months, because like with the invasion of the Russian troops in Ukraine, there was again like this fear of, oh, maybe we have to defend ourselves. Maybe the war is coming back to Europe. So what is Italy doing? How Italy will position itself in this like global power structure? And we made demonstrations before February 24 against the military bases, against NATO. I mean, we were in front of the military bases of NATO saying, stop NATO expansion in the east, stop intervention against Russia, and so on and so on. And the participation was huge. People came into the streets because they were convinced about that. But it was modified with the intervention of Russia in Ukraine. So today it is like little bit ambiguous. There is still a strong feeling of like being against the war. But the main enemy is not anymore NATO. I think, I mean, also Potere al Popolo, Power to the People, our organization, we had the position neither with Putin nor with the NATO. I mean, this is a war. War is always like a destruction of human beings. It's always against the working classes all over the world. So we have to stop the war. But it was clear, like, against both. But if you say now we are against NATO, people are saying, okay, you are for Putin. So this is like the situation in the public opinion. It's difficult today. It's difficult to mobilize in a complex way against war. How we imagine to do against really the war, also against the militarization, against like that the public expenditure goes to military and not to social services. So this tentative we have to try to make about the peace movement, a movement also for social justice and environmental justice and so on. But it remains very complicated in this context.
And that's very interesting, and obviously also the case, I think, across most of Europe. There even, I think, is a little bit more space in the United States to be more nuanced and critical of NATO than perhaps in Europe, probably because of geography.
Exactly.
But beyond public opinion, what has been the impact of the war on politics, specifically on the growth of the right? Is there a connection here? Like, do you think the war in Ukraine and the ongoing escalation has actually empowered the right in Italy?
This is very difficult to say if there is a direct influence, but I think that, I mean, if you look at the Italian political parties in the parliament, they were all very together, very cohesion in the position on war. From the far right to the center left, they all took position against Putin for the militarization of the conflict, so sending weapons, sending military help to Zelensky was like the priority for everyone. Mario Draghi, that is like the expression, I would say Mario Draghi is like the voice of the US in Europe and above all in Italy. And we have to say in 2021, when he was implemented by the president, it was also because the US made pressure on that. That the voice of the Prime Minister of Italy should be again a voice for the US, for NATO, and so on. So he was able to bring together everyone. So also the far right expressed itself for the intervention in Ukraine, and so I think there is not a direct influence of the situation of war into the elections, but of course the social consequences of the war we are living. I mean, as I said, we are speaking about inflation at around 8%. The statistics are showing that in 2023, around 120 companies are risking to close, and this touches over 400,000 workers. So, I mean,
in Italy, just in Italy.
This is just in Italy.
Wow.
And now the Confindustria, the main Italian employers federation, they are asking for an intervention similar to Germany. I mean, they know they can never spend 200 billion euro in Italy because they do not have the money, but they ask for like an intervention of 50, 60, 70 billion euro to support families and above all the companies, because the companies, they see the bills, the energy bills increasing of about 100, 200, 300%. And so they say, yeah, we need this intervention. So I think the incapacity also of a center left and the left to give a response to this crisis is something that the far right was like profiting about. This is like the way the war in Ukraine influenced also like the increasing power of the far right.
And I guess so that kind of answers the next question, but maybe you could elaborate a little bit. So what is because for this woman Meloni, I mean, she's been portrayed in some corners of Western media as being like a populist and being like against the status quo. But in terms of NATO, Russia, Ukraine, America, she's perfectly in line with all of those things. So I guess how does her party, how does the far right, how does her movement, if you want to call it that, view these things? I mean, is there any difference between their views on NATO and what you might have gotten from like a centrist leader?
No, this is the point. There is a total continuity in that. And I mean, even after elections, I think it was the day after elections, so in September 26th, there was like, again, in the media, I mean, she went out, she said, okay, I won, so I will be the next prime minister. And in like the second sentence was like, okay, we have to strengthen NATO, we have to strengthen the European Union inside of this conflict. So there is a total continuity in that. There is a total continuity in the question of war. There is a total continuity also in the economic propositions. And I think this is the point also, like not only concerning NATO and the European Union and the US and the war, but also like in the economy, like in the economical level, she is representing exactly the same propositions and positions which were presented already since the 90s and the beginning of 2000s from the right and the center right. Like I remember it was Berlusconi that spoke the first time about a flat tax. We need a flat tax in Italy, 15% for everyone. And the League of Salvini also tried to implement it, was not able. This was the reason also why some parts and fractions of the capital left him behind and said we have to invest in Giorgia Meloni. She's saying it exactly in the same way. We need to implement a flat tax. So she has a neoliberal economic policy, and she will try to making the interests of capital on this level. She's against a legal minimum wage. She's against like social assistance for poor people. She wants to abolish this measure that was introduced 3 years ago. So she's very anti-popular, anti-working class, and making the interests of the elite nationally and internationally.
And do you think her election is part of a trend in Europe? I mean, do you think we'll see more, fascist-inspired figures rise to power? We've already seen something similar happen in Sweden. And there does seem to be a global phenomenon, not just even in the global north, in a lot of the world right now, where you do see a rise in these sort of like pseudo or fake populists who are pretending like they're against the status quo and then using the sort of culture wars to push a right-wing socially right-wing agenda while also pushing the same nasty neoliberal economic policies that have led to so much really rot and devastation across society.
Yeah, I mean, of course, it is in a way a trend in Europe, and she's totally like the election of the Brothers of Italy is following in a way a trend, as you said, Sweden, but also like Eastern Europe countries, but also like the increasing power of Rassemblement National in France. Even if she didn't win the presidential elections, but I mean there was a really strong strengthening of Marine Le Pen in France. There is a strengthening of Vox in Spain, which will be probably win important parts of the elections next year. There was also like a regional election in Germany where the AfD, Alternative für Deutschland, increased a lot. They reached like 11%, something never seen before. So there is like a general trend. I think the reason why there is like this kind of trend, it's what we also saw historically. There is like this power vacuum today. The elites in Europe do not know how to solve this deep crisis we are living in. They cannot give the responses to the working class. So like strong leaders, populist leaders, above all from the right, they have this capacity to fill this power vacuum. But what you are saying is that it's something very fast, very rapidly. I mean, they can occupy this place. Salvini is like the perfect image of that. In 2018, he was the the second party in Italy with 17%. He imposed to the Five Star Movement to make this coalition with him. He was the interior minister. He was really attacking the rights of the immigrants. He was criminalizing the NGOs, helping the refugees in the Mediterranean Sea, and so on and so on. But he was not able to give a response, political response to the crisis the capital also was living. So this is like something important. And today, like in 2019, 1 year later, he reached even 34% of the consensus in the European elections. And today he had like something a little more than 8%. So it is like really an up and down that is very fast. And this is something very characteristic of our days. I think that someone can win today, after 3 years, he's again down. And we saw it also a little bit in France, where the Socialist Party lost a lot after the government of Hollande. They crashed down on 2%, something never seen before. So there is like this very unstable political situation. But what I also think is there is like also like the left wing that can profit from that situation, as we see, for example, in France, where La France Insoumise, also with Jean-Luc Mélenchon, has a very genuine left program, and they are increasing. They reached like 22% in the presidential elections. Over 7.7 million people voted for Jean-Luc Mélenchon. We had it also in Spain with the increasing power of Podemos, of course, also linked to internal crisis and so on. So we had also problems, but I think it is like this, these two extremes that can also grow. I mean, the big problem, I think, in Italy, but also in Europe, but in Italy above all, is the lack of big social movements led by the working class. If you see why the left is also like in this situation in Italy, it's because in the last 12 years, we didn't have huge social mobilizations led by the working class. This is something very different in France, for example, where the Gilets jaunes, the Yellow Vest movement, was able to occupy the streets and the political debate for over 2 years. And the result also of La France Insoumise, I think, has to be read in this social dynamics that are like that France was living. In Italy, we do not have this situation. So it is also very difficult for an alternative, a radical left, to build itself. I mean, you can make a lot with voluntarism. You can be the organization with the best ideas and so on, but it is not enough. You need also social movements. And this is something we have to work on, I think. And this is also, I mean, for responding again on the question of the trend, I think there is a trend because there is like of the right and the far right, because the social contradictions are exacerbating in Europe, and because the ruling classes are in a deep crisis, hegemonic crisis. And in this power vacuum, these far-right leaders are occupying today a position, but that tomorrow can be also occupied by left-wing parties.
I think that's a very, very good point, and that actually can be that's something that is informative for people around the world. It really is a moment where it's not written in stone that like the right has to win, and it is an opportunity for the left. And there's just one last question I wanted to ask you, Maurizio, and that's about the issue of China. I did see that Meloni has quite hawkish views when it comes to the issue of Taiwan and China. So can you explain what is her position on China, and what is the general conversation on China in Italy? Because I know it varies by country, and Italy actually does have very close economic ties with China.
Yeah, totally. And not only Italy, of course, in Europe, but also Germany and France. And I mean, after the 2.5 years of COVID, the Prime Minister of Germany, Scholz, and also Macron, the President of France, they traveled again to China, and because they need the dialogues. I mean, these economic ties there are important, and above all in this situation of crisis, where like the economic growth is like stopping in the main economies worldwide, in the US, in China, but also in Germany. I mean, these ties are very important. They need to renew these ties and to invest in this collaboration. I think Italy, it's very specific, because with the last government, above all with Giuseppe Conte, the first Giuseppe Conte and the second government of Giuseppe Conte, so in between 2018 and 2021, he had a very close tie and a close collaboration with China. He also signed the new Silk Road initiative and integrated Italy in this agreement and this treaty, and so this was also a reason why the U.S. reacted so strongly after the crisis of the second government of Giuseppe Conte to say, stop, we need Mario Draghi, because Mario Draghi is assuring our positions also in relation with China. So this is like something that was very hardly declared. Today, Giorgia Meloni, I think she has three reasons why she is very against China. I mean, this is like the question of Taiwan. She declared, she was like, as I said before, she was visiting Florida, she was visiting important politicians in the US, and she declared, I mean, for her, the sovereignty of Taiwan cannot be touched. So it is like they condemn and support the Taiwan if China will, in a way, try to take over the Taiwan. So this is like a very clear anti-Chinese position on Taiwan. It is also very clear anti-Chinese position in the new Silk Road initiative. The agreement Giuseppe Conte signed with China will expire in 2024, and she already said we will not renew it. So Italy will be like excluded from this agreement and from this collaboration. And this is, I think, the base, and this is the third element, is like the strong anti-communism of Giorgia Meloni. I mean, as a fascist, she has to be strongly anti-communist, and
Right.
this is the thing. I think. I mean, the reaction of China was also very strong in these last days. They also already made declarations that, I mean, with Giorgia Meloni, there is a far right governing now in Italy, and that will bring problems in the relationship between Italy and China, and so on and so on. So there were already from both sides movements how to, in a way, redefine this relation. But I think that Italy is not able to just cut the relations with China. It is economically impossible. So this is also very rhetorically. This is something that in politics, and in Italian politics above all, is very strong. Like this, rhetorically attack everything, but then at the end you have to collaborate. And Germany, France, Italy, the three main economies of Europe, they cannot just cut like this the relations with China.
Well, Maurizio, I want to thank you for joining me for an hour to break all this down. Can you tell people where they can follow your work?
Yeah, I mean, we are on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, like Potere al Popolo, Power to the People. You can follow us. You can follow our spokesperson. They are very active also on social media. They are invited in the news and the TV shows. So we have a presence in the shows and in social media. It's poterealpopolo.org. That's our homepage, and glad to see you there.
Well, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks for watching, everyone. If you want to see more progressive anti-imperialist content like this, make sure you hit the subscribe button so you can stay up to date with the latest breakthrough news content. And if you want to support our work and get access to exclusive content, head over to patreon.com/breakthroughnews.